I built the product, by hand in my kitchen, scaled that as long as I could. And then within 4 years, we had moved 3 times to different manufacturing spaces. And I was doing all the research I could to learn about different machines and how to build out a production line. And it was just so much that I had to just learn on the fly.
Hey guys, Nathan Chen, welcome back to another Foundr interview. If you want to know how to build a global e-commerce brand from your home, starting with little capital all the way to exiting for 9 figures, then you have to watch this interview. Today I speak with Jaime Schmidt. She's the co-founder of a company called Schmidt Naturals, and we're going to find out how she has done this. If you are enjoying these interviews, make sure you subscribe to our channel, give us a thumbs up, leave a comment below. All right, Jaime, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today. First question I ask everyone that comes on is, how'd you find yourself doing the work you're doing today?
Well, it took a lot to get here. I've held 22 jobs according to my report from the IRS. So today's job, I'd say my entrepreneurial journey, really was the highlight of my career. And then today I'm an investor and an author. But getting to the point of starting a company, that was just a lot of exploration, getting my hands dirty, and really just not settling, like not allowing myself to be complacent in my work and just realizing that I wanted to be happy with what I was doing. And so there's a lot that got up to that point.
So was Schmidt Naturals your first company?
Yeah, it was. And when I started it, I did not anticipate it really, becoming much of a company. It started more as a hobby, something I was doing for fun. I still am, in Portland, Oregon. It's the most creative city here in the US. And everybody here is like an artist or a maker or a creator of some sort. And I wanted to fit in. And so I really was, kind of stressing like, how can I find my creative outlet? And so I started trying all sorts of things. The timing was great though, because I had moved here with the intention of, really figuring out what I wanted to do with my life. I had found myself working my way up the HR ladder, kind of in a corporate job, really good pay, decent benefits, but just not loving the work. So when I came here, I thought it was, a nice opportunity for a fresh start. And Portland was the perfect place. So I got busy with a lot of different things. And where I really found, myself was with making personal care products. I was pregnant at the time too. And so I was paying closer attention to the products I was using on my skin. And so I started making deodorant, shampoos, soaps, lotions, all of it. And next thing you know, I was selling it at the farmer's market.
Interesting. And when was that? Was that 2012, 2011?
2010.
2010.
Yep.
Got you. So started hand making the products yourself. How did you work out like what to put in them and how to produce them?
Yeah, a lot of trial and error. I'm not a chemist. I get that question a lot. But I'm just a fan of natural products and clean ingredients and just did a lot of research on, the functions of different natural things. And so my first formulas, it was just products or ingredients you can find in your kitchen shelf. So baking soda, cocoa butter and things like that. And so not, the most advanced, synthetic ingredients, but just very natural, organic ingredients from the earth.
Yeah, I see. And you would use like YouTube or something to learn how to produce a deodorant or?
It was more of learning about the functions of the different ingredients and then using my own, I guess, a lot of trial and error to bring them together to create a formula that felt good. And there were so many iterations to get the texture right. That was the hardest part was, you can choose the ingredients that are going to serve a purpose. For example, baking soda absorbs odor, and then you can use arrowroot powder to help keep the armpit dry. But the trick is in getting them to come together and stay together without using synthetic binders. And I don't want to get too technical, but like that, it truly was a major challenge, and especially without having like a chemistry degree or any sort of background in science. It was not easy, but it was fun. There wasn't any obligation hanging over me. I didn't have business partners. I didn't have any investment capital, so no investors to answer to. It was more just fun for me. And then the business very slowly, it took a couple of years kind of easing into it, perfecting the formula and getting feedback from customers at the market. That was a great opportunity for me to meet face to face with customers and get their feedback on what I was doing.
Interesting. So how long did it take to get the first product, and what was the first product for you for comfortable to go to farmers markets?
I never was 100% comfortable when I went out. I kind of just realized it was time to just get out there and sell it. I loved it personally, and I shared with friends and family, and they were raving about the product, and so I thought, well, let's just see what other people think. And so it was also just a great way to make a buck and spend a Saturday afternoon at the market in Portland. But then customers were loving it, coming back the next week, giving me their feedback, and it was also not everybody had 100% positive things to say, so it was just a great opportunity for me to take their criticisms too and apply them to perfecting the product. And customers just they love to be heard. They love to feel like they're part, of your brand, especially in those earliest days. So it was just a win-win for everybody.
So you would say, like, you were selling at farmers markets for about 2 years. So would you say maybe it took like 3 to 6 months to be able to create the first product to be able to take there?
Yeah, that'd be an appropriate timeline. I was still refining things in the process, and I'd also started with more products. I had a whole line of products, but then I realized the deodorant was the one thing that there was a real business potential behind. I was at the markets for 1.5 to 2 years, but pretty early on, I realized there was more. There was wholesale potential and a real opportunity on the shelves. Especially in deodorant, there just weren't a lot of natural deodorants, and the ones that were out there just they needed a shakeup.
Interesting. So, during that 2 years period, was there any point in time where you're like, I can go full time on this, or was it just like a side hobby passion project for those few years and it just slowly grew, or like yeah? I'd love to get a gauge.
I wanted to go all in full time. My household income was very humble. My husband was a social worker. Our income was less than $35,000 between the two of us, and we were new parents. So I did have to take a couple side jobs in the earliest days. So I found a couple gigs locally that spent just a few hours a week, enough to just have a bit of a cushion. And then that money, I really considered the seed money for the business.
Yeah, I see. So how did the brand evolve from farmers markets? Did you start going direct to consumer, or did you start wholesale, or like how did the brand evolve?
Wholesale came first. I had some interest at the markets locally with retailers approaching me, and then I also just recognized, in Portland there was a lot of opportunity to sell at places like food co-ops where natural enthusiasts would be shopping. And so I really took advantage of that. And then about a year into that, I really took on the D2C piece and built out the website. And that's when we really exploded. And omni-channel was really at the forefront of our strategy, or my strategy back then, from day one. And I recognized I wanted to be everywhere. A lot of brands, especially natural, will consider a niche market and want to stay within that market. But for me, I really saw opportunity to build beyond that. I felt there was major opportunity because natural brands hadn't done it yet. And two, I just felt that it was the right thing to do. I wanted people to have access to healthy, natural products that worked. And people, in middle America, and just people that aren't necessarily, connected to some of these, like, the communities like Portland, just didn't have access and even know about some of these products. And for me, that was really important to give them access.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. So, I'm sorry if I'm asking too many details, but it's just good to get context for people because I'm familiar with our community, and what you've done is so impressive, by the way. Like,
Thank you.
You're like 9 figures in annual revenue to then eventually exiting to Unilever, and now for your first business in the space of about 8 years, like, that is very impressive. So
Thank you. I'll clarify. The revenue was 7 figures, but the acquisition was 9.
Okay, all right, sorry, 7.
Yeah. Actually, no, I'm sorry, no, 8 figures.
8 figures annual revenue, 9-figure exit. Extremely impressive. So I just want to give context because I know these questions, because people will doubt themselves, right? And this is like an incredible story. So, okay, so farmers markets, obviously got a few wholesale deals. How did you fund the POs from those wholesale deals if cash flow was there any cash flow crunches? Did you have to get outside capital to fund that, or still bootstrapped?
That was the trickiest part of building the business, was the financing piece. And to be honest, when I first started, I didn't give a whole lot of thought into, how am I going to fund this thing? It really just grew so naturally and so organically that, next thing you know, my business expenses were attached to my personal bank account, and it's not something I necessarily recommend. It just kind of happened that way. And we were strapped for cash constantly, but somehow we made it work. And I think it was just, I grew up with a very frugal mentality and upbringing, and I really, just looking back, like I think that really played into it. But at the same time, you have to, of course, cut corners and be cheap, but you also had to be willing to spend money when you're building a business. So the trick isn't just knowing where to be frugal and where to be willing to spend. So apparently, I was pretty good at that. And I think what really helped too is once we kicked the D2C into action, then, we had that immediate income that we could then use to fund other operations of the business. So the wholesale piece was certainly probably the hardest to manage because you're dealing with payment terms and also, your margins, you're not making as much money on that product. But that D2C piece, if you can maintain strong sales there, then that can be super helpful in funding the business.
Yeah, got you. So when did you go full-time all in on the business? Because after the markets, a few POs, you're probably about 2-3 years in. When did you go full-time all in?
Yeah, it was about, I'd say 3 years in. It was a big kind of leap of faith, but I realized, all my time was really needed to be spent on the business if I wanted to take it to the next level. And once I made that decision, that's when we really just exploded. Started picking up some bigger retail accounts, some chains, cross country, and actually our global accounts came pretty early too. So that's not typical sometimes for a consumer product, is to get that interest from overseas so soon. But I really embraced that, and I think a lot of people are intimidated by that. And I think that's one piece of advice I would give to new founders is pursue that international business, because there's a lot of opportunity there. And so in doing that, it opened up a lot of revenue streams for us too.
Interesting. So it sounds like some of the game changers was starting small, thinking of it as a project, not as like a side project, or not as a big business, and you got your feedback loop from the farmers markets, which sounds like a game changer to perfect the product and to really understand the customer avatar and how to speak to that market.
Absolutely. But, as the company got bigger, that became a bit more sophisticated. We couldn't just rely on my intuition and the local customers. We had to start implementing practices where, we were getting true consumer insights and paying for surveys and things like that. But in the earliest days, that was just a blessing for me. And I really do think, just easing into the business like I did was an asset. And it also enabled me to just really build up a community of followers and brand fanatics that are still with us today.
Yeah, amazing. And when it comes to D2C, you said you turned that on. What did that look like? You obviously started on Shopify. What did you start doing PPC? Did you work with an agency to do PPC, or did you start working with influencers? What did that whole play look like? Because that sounds like that was a bit of a step change in growth as well.
Yeah. Well, we started to get influencers kind of before that. There was a lot of interest through YouTubers back then, like 2012 was like the time of the YouTuber, and we had a lot of interest there. But around that same time, my husband, Chris, joined up. He came in around 2013, 14, and built out a website. He's, fortunately has that skill, so we didn't have to pay for somebody outside to do that. And then just really kicked in the ads too, the ad strategy around social media and Google. And back then, ads were cheaper across Facebook and really effective too. People weren't using them as much, and things look a little different today, but that was really effective for us.
Yeah, it is. Look, there still are tons of opportunities in the market for like PPC or influencers, but it is astronomically more competitive.
Right. And expensive, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. So then what happened next? Like, did you start building head office in Oregon? Did you start using 3PLs? At what point in time did you hand over the manufacturing of the products? How did that all work?
Yeah, I kept manufacturing in-house throughout the growth of the business up till the acquisition by Unilever.
Wow,
so that was
are
pretty
you
crazy.
serious?
It's nuts, because you think about all the stresses that you have as a startup in general, right? And then you add this whole piece of in-house manufacturing on top of it. It's just so many more layers of responsibility. But I just couldn't see it any other way. I had built the product, by hand in my kitchen, scaled that as long as I could. And then within 4 years, we had moved 3 times to different manufacturing spaces. And I was doing all the research I could to learn about different machines and how to build out a production line. And it was just so much that I had to just learn on the fly. Um, I'm glad I did it that way. I don't think everybody's equipped to do it. I don't think every product is built to be managed that way, but um, a lot of challenges and major setbacks and expenses, that come along with it. And then in the final years, right before the acquisition, I actually had partnered up with a contract manufacturer just as a backup and kind of a peace of mind if anything were to go terribly wrong. And in doing that, I learned a lot actually by just observing their processes and how they were manufacturing. And they were makers of some of the bigger deodorant brands. And so it was just a nice way for me to get a peek inside, what a real factory looks like, and then bring that back home and implement it in my factory.
Interesting. So at what point in time did you personally get sick of making the product?
Never really. In fact, that was probably my favorite part of the
Really?
business. But I mean, I had other things I had to put my energy on, obviously, because as a founder, you become the CEO and you're leading, this company. But making was so fun for me, but definitely became a distraction at some point. And so I had to hire out a team. Pretty early. That was actually my first hire. It was somebody to help make the deodorant. And then I hired someone right after to start shipping. But whenever we created new scents or new formulas, that was still led by me. And I was doing that in my home kitchen, despite the fact that we had our manufacturing facility. I would just go home and just really focus and create in my kitchen. And then we would introduce the new scents. And so that was pretty cool to keep it, in the founder's hands, and our customers appreciated that. And it was fun for me.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. I reckon there's some magic to that. I know you kind of just like, yeah, it was fun, but I reckon there's some magic to that, that basically you had your hand in product development and actually doing it, understanding the processes all the way to then exiting the business. So I'm curious, when it came to, I guess, finding that first employee, did they just work from your kitchen, or you just had to get a facility at that point in time and invest capital into equipment? Or because that would have been quite cost intensive. Did you ever take outside funding, or was only when you partnered with Unilever to begin with? How did you, because that sounds very capital intensive.
Right. Well, to answer your first question, my first employee that I hired, we happen to have a mother-in-law house. I don't know if you know that term. Basically, a kind of a separate little house or dwelling behind your house that just had the perfect setup for somebody to make deodorant. So it had a tiny little bathroom. It had a small space that they could use. And so I hired a friend, and he came over and he set his own hours, and he'd be out there making deodorant. But the funny thing is, I was cooling in the product in my refrigerator at the time. So he'd be, trouncing into the house with this whole platter full of deodorant, and we'd have to make room in the refrigerator. So it definitely was not ideal. But then I found a space really close by in my neighborhood, which was a really interesting setup. There was a man who had leased out some kind of separate spaces within this bigger building. And so there was a pet shop in there was a paper shredder, and then there was a space for me. And then I was able to build it just to my liking and my needs which was so perfect for the very first manufacturing space, because he was really flexible with terms. It was a month-to-month setup. He cut me a really good deal on my rent. We kind of became buddies. And so it just worked out nicely. And I feel, really fortunate to have had that opportunity. And I think the best thing about it was that I was able to finally schedule pickups by UPS and USPS, because I used to go to the post office every day, with my bags and my boxes, and it became a big, huge thing. So I think, that's not always the case, right? But if there's opportunity for founders to find that setup, that was beautiful for me.
Oh, that's awesome. And okay, so it was in 2017 that you partnered with Unilever. How did that come about? Did they find you, or how did that come about?
Well, we were at a point where the business definitely needed money. We had gotten to this point by really just being stretched thin the entire time. But in 2017, we launched in Costco, Target, Walmart. So all our money was tied up on shelves. It just was not available to us. And so it became, pretty necessary to start fundraising. And so we looked at a few different options there. We talked to some VCs, started talking to private equity firms, and then took on a broker, Goldman Sachs, to start just sort of, having these conversations for us. And through that process, Unilever, and then a couple other strategics entered the picture. It was not in my thinking at all, ever, throughout the growth of the business. In fact, even when we started fundraising, I just wasn't thinking about an exit at the time. But then once they started, expressing interest, and then we started doing diligence and opening up our data room and things, and then the reality was, became clear. And I thought, this is actually a really, really smart step for the business.
That makes sense. So would you be able to share kind of like what, at that point in time when it was starting to get quite capital intensive around just POs and cash flow, like what was annual revenue, how many staff, how many people did you have, how many like order volume, like what kind of movement were we talking?
Yeah, we were around, I think, 25 million in revenue at the time of the acquisition. We had 150 employees working across 2 shifts. That included manufacturing. And then retailers, we had about 30,000 retailers across 30 different countries. And so we were,
Yeah, wow. And and you also doing international too, you said, as well, not just US.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. Okay, so now what are you excited about now? Because I know you released a book, and I know that you're doing investing as well. So what's exciting for you now?
Yeah, all sorts of things. I think at the top of my priority list is really just being a resource for other aspiring entrepreneurs. I really want to democratize entrepreneurship and let other people know that, like, they're equipped to be an entrepreneur. I think sometimes we need stories like the Schmidt story to just give us that push to take the leap. And I think my story is just a perfect example of somebody who started from nothing, just had a belief in a product and recognized an opportunity and just went for it. So with that, I've done a couple of things. I've launched my book, like you said. It's called Supermaker, Crafting Business on Your Own Terms. I released it in September last year. That's been really well received. The feedback I'm getting is that people are, exactly what I was hoping, is that they're like, wow, I see myself in your story, and this is really inspiring. I also started an investment fund with my husband and business partner, Chris Cantino. It's called Color, and we invest, we say, in the things people buy and the way they buy them. So we're real passionate about the consumer space, not just products, but the tech that supports products and brands. And there's more in the works too. We had a grant program when COVID started that helped keep the entrepreneurial dream alive by funding businesses and building a grant network, or excuse me, a mentor network. I have a TV opportunity coming up. It's called Going Public. I'm not sure if you've heard of that, but it's a new series. It'll be streamed on Entrepreneur Media, where we follow 5 entrepreneurs who are raising capital or looking to go public. And then investors at home can invest through Regulation A+. So I'll be a mentor on that show.
Oh, wow. That's cool.
Yeah.
That's exciting.
Yeah, it is cool. I'm excited.
Wow, interesting. So I'm curious around your investment fund. Tell me about some of the companies that you've invested in thus far, and what is interesting happening right now, because post-COVID, there's a lot of deal flow. But during this time period, right? Obviously COVID hit, and then it's crazy some of the things that are happening right now, what people are working on. There's a shift happening around all sorts of things. So there's a lot of deal flow, a lot of interesting businesses out there. I'd love to hear your take.
Yeah, for sure. There's definitely a lot of D2C brands that have come out of COVID, which we're excited about. But what we really are interested in is brands that recognize the opportunity with omni-channel. That's how Schmidt's was built, and I really think a lot of brands are missing out when they go D2C only. And so we always try to encourage people to think beyond that. And I think not just expanding into retail, but expanding into channels that maybe your competition's not thinking about. For example, I mentioned earlier with Schmidt's, I wanted to make our product available to the masses and not just for that niche natural user. And so I looked at channels that the competition wanted nothing to do with, right? Like Walmart, for example. People would, frown on that and say, I don't want my products in Walmart, right? But I did, and I thought there was just a beautiful opportunity there to reach customers that we otherwise wouldn't, and that the competition was missing out on. So we look for brands that are kind of thinking that way.
Interesting. When you, just for those listening that are not familiar with omni-channel, what does that mean?
Yeah, it just means distributing your products across different distribution outlets. So, for example, not just D2C or your website, but going into retailers and selling on a variety of e-com or sites or marketplaces. Yeah,
Yep, got you. So,
Amazon.
yep,
Yeah,
you're everywhere. You want to be like that
yeah,
idea of being everywhere.
yeah,
Yep,
yeah.
yep, yep. Okay, so, yeah, I'd love to hear. Like, so, are you able to share some of the companies or any interesting ones? Because you said you also,
Yeah.
you support the tech behind some of these companies as well. So that could be perhaps some like a Shopify tool, or probably probably don't go as niche as Shopify plugins, do you?
Well, the one we recently announced our investment in is called Alloy, and they do a lot to support D2C brands. So there would be tools on there that will help just support that buying experience and beyond. So that we're really excited about. One of the brands, Ugly, is it's a drink of sparkling waters that at face value, you would think, okay, that's a competitive market, right? Like who wants to invest in sparkling waters because there's so many brands, but that's a great example of what I was just talking about being open to, distribution channels that, some of the competition isn't. So that one we're really excited about. And we've also invested in another beverage company called House, who really, that one comes to my mind because they executed so beautifully during COVID, where they created this restaurant project, they called it, where they partnered up with local restaurants to create specific flavors. And then any money that was made in selling those flavors went to the restaurants to help keep them open during COVID, which is pretty crazy to think about, like a startup, being so generous. But it just brought so much attention to their brand, and it just was a really good look for them. But our whole portfolio is at Color.capital. We have about 15 investments to date. So generally it's spanning, obviously food and beverage, but also we enjoy fashion and personal care, and then the tech piece.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. But
Yeah.
yeah, purely focus on e-com.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Because the e-com is massive. There's so much opportunity out there. I'd love to delve a little deeper on the idea that you're really focused on companies that are open to omni-channel. Why do you think some brands are just focused purely on straight D2C? Like you look at a brand like Glossier, like they're pure
Yeah.
direct to consumer. There's just
I,
quite a few, right? Yeah.
I think there's definitely some exceptions where that makes sense to stay D2C. Like Glossier is a perfect example, or a brand with a product like Peloton, right? Like you don't want to, finding them in stores wouldn't make sense. But if your product is a consumable and it's a price point that you can make it at high volume, I think you're missing out if you don't. And I think a lot of brands are intimidated by it. One, because the price points, it's harder, the margins, right? We just don't make as much money that way. And then two, it's just kind of scary. I think some people are really intimidated by retail. There's so much to learn. There are a lot of like fees involved and just extra work. But I encourage people that are feeling that way to get out there and just try it, because it's not as scary as as you might think. It takes some work to get the buyer's attention sometimes, but once that happens, and if you prove yourself, then it can be a beautiful opportunity to expand your brand. And also too, I want to add, I think having channel exclusive products sometimes is the right answer for some brands. It's okay to have certain products that you're keeping on your website, and then maybe having a specific product that you sell to a certain type of retailer. That is a strategy that you should be thinking about too if you are considering omnichannel.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So this brings me to my next question, where I actually resonate. It can be scary, and we speak to a lot of people in our community where it's easy to set up a Shopify store, send products to influencers, develop the brand, have your email marketing strategy going, go Facebook ads, and you can build a significant business just rinse repeating that formula, right?
Yeah,
But the retail space, you've got longer. I guess it's longer lead times. It's a lot of knocking down doors. It's a lot of no's. It is scary, and it can be intimidating working with these big brands. The margins can be, much different to D2C. So I'm curious, for those listening right now that have a brand, they're not in retail, what advice would you give? How would you say someone should get started?
I would say when you're approaching the retailers, really show how you're going to add value to the category as a whole and expand it. It's less effective to come in and talk about, why your product's better than what's on the shelves currently. It's more about how are you growing that category as a whole. I learned that through the conversations I was having with buyers, and I just think that's just a smart thing to think about. That might not seem obvious in the beginning when you're just getting started.
And what about even getting in the door, like getting
Yeah,
those meetings, like, because
that's
any
that's
tips,
the hard
tricks,
part.
anything
Yeah.
there?
Well, I have some good stories in my book where, I just had really just persistence and, probably annoyance with some of these retailers. And I followed up a lot. I really believed that my product belonged on their shelves, and I always made a case for why. But I would, I'd build out cases I could present. So for example, if you are just selling D2C, show your growth, show that, how much you've grown from when you started to now and month over month. And then if you're in other retailers, you can make a case for why you deserve to be in the next, level up of retailers. I remember, and this is less relevant now with COVID, but trade shows are just a really great way to connect with retailers. And so when there's opportunity there, I would highly encourage that. I made a lot of connections that way.
Yeah. And
Mhm.
what about in terms of prospecting? Who are the right decision makers? Do you use LinkedIn, or like how do you work out who's the right decision makers?
To work with me and that team.
Yep.
Or, yeah. Yeah, I didn't use LinkedIn a ton. I like it for networking and connecting, with industry friends, but I found most of my employees, and I had honestly, like, I don't recommend this always, but my first couple came through referrals. And referrals I think are good, but I think it gets a little bit weird if you're starting to hire friends and family. And I did that in the beginning, and that became harder to manage later. But I do think referrals and networking are going to be important, like maybe through Twitter, for example. I think that's a great place to build community, and to really, show what you're doing. There's this whole idea of building in public now where, you're very transparent about every step of the business. And I think doing that allows you to get people excited about what you're building and get people wanting to work for you.
Yeah, it's interesting you say there is this big movement, right, around just building in
Yeah.
public, like ultimate transparency. You look at companies like Buffer, who they even make all their
Mm-hmm.
metrics public. And yeah, people like to follow the journey, that hero's journey. There's something special about that. You look at Gymshark and what Ben Francis has done. Are you familiar with his story and how he's documented it along the way over these past 10 years?
Yeah, I've seen a bit of that. I think I saw recently an example of brands that are effectively building in public. I think that's just the trend now. But I also want to say, like, I challenge it a little because I think there's some beautiful examples, but I also think that to do that, you have to have an established audience. And we don't all have that right away. When we're hit with a business idea or inspiration, like, we don't necessarily have our audience built. And to try to do that before we launch can be stressful and really time consuming. When I started my business, I was nobody, right? No one knew who Jaime Schmidt was. But I was able to build it successfully. And then, now people know of me, but, back then they didn't. And so I just would encourage people not to stress on that point too much. If it makes sense for your company, and you can do it, or you already have that audience, that's great. But if you don't, don't let that stop you.
Yeah, because there's always an opportunity cost, right? Like you could be creating content, or you could be out there, hustling to get into Target,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Right.
And
Yeah,
taking
exactly.
meetings, right? It's just, yeah, it is tricky, right? To know. And yeah, I'm curious around decision making, right? Because you obviously have been right 80% of the time to get to the outcome that you got to. What is your how do you make decisions, and key ones at that? What does that process look like for you?
I'd say it's no magic formula, but it's a mix of my intuition. And on that, real quick, I want to say, some people might scoff at that or think it's kind of silly, but really, your intuition is the culmination of, like, every experience that that's gotten you to this point. And so, don't be afraid to trust it. That plus, research, right, and learning what I can, and maybe trusting in some other people's opinions, and then ultimately just having confidence and taking a risk.
Yeah, love it.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, look, we will work towards wrapping up.
Okay.
A couple of last questions. Is there anything that you wanted me to ask you that I haven't yet, or anything that you wanted to share with our audience of early stage startup founders?
I mean, this is my favorite audience. I just, if I had to leave you with a piece of advice, I'd probably say, block out the noise as you're building. I think, especially now, I mean, everyone's trying to create something, right? And, whether it's a business or just a name for themselves, and it's intimidating and overwhelming. And we find ourselves trying to compare ourselves to each other or competition. I think you just have to go inwards and just, focus on the vision that you have for what you're building and stay focused there. But also don't be afraid to shift. I think that becomes hard for some people because they think they have it figured out, but then things start to look a little different, or they might need to change something, but they're, so stubborn about it. And so try to keep an open mind there and think, you know what, I'm shifting this because it makes sense for my business. And so always being flexible and willing to take your time with things.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. Thank you. And last question is, where can people find out more about yourself, your work, Supermaker, your new book, and also your fund?
Yeah, probably the best place would be through my social media. So Twitter or Instagram, it's just Jaime Schmidt. Jaime spelled Jaime. And then I have a website, jaimeschmidt.info. And my fund, again, is called Color. So pretty easy to get a hold of me too. I love DMs and I try to help, as many people as I can if I hear from you.
Amazing. Well, look, thank you so much for your time. This was an incredible interview. Really, really appreciate how open and honest you are and how giving you are with your experiences. And congratulations on all of your success thus far.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.
Hey guys, hope you're loving our videos and that you're getting heaps of value from them. If you are, make sure to hit the like button and make sure to subscribe to join the Foundr fam. If you did enjoy this video and want to continue to master your skills, make sure you click here to access your free training now, where we'll go into way more depth with this founder.